Anyway, guys, listen, welcome to another Mamemeister and Chums Talk. Pish, delighted. This is actually a first. I've actually got not one or two, but three guests. Now, I'm just going to let you from the top. Obviously, you know me. Well, I'm normally Mamemeister, but I'm calling myself Al because that's my name. I'll let Rich, you want to introduce yourself, buddy, and just tell us why you're part of this thing?
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm Richard, and I'm 1/3 of the Ted Dabney Experience podcast, which Paul, Tony, and I started. We're on our 5th episode.
Under lockdown.
Are we on? Yeah, we started under lockdown. It's for lockdown retro gaming podcast. Although we're not really retro gaming as such. Paul, Tony, and I went to Free Play Florida last year and discussed doing this podcast, and we wanted to, I guess, shine a light on the, I guess, less. Paul, what would you say? Take over. Let me get my thoughts together. Paul, go on. Take the reins.
I'm essentially doing it so I can spend more time online with Richie and Tony.
Yeah,
that's my main motivation. The idea was that we would talk to people specifically from the classic era of arcade gaming. So it was quite specific. And we would definitely want the guests to be the main deal. And we would try and not be beery lads rambling about retro games, which is why I've got wine, not beer. And we would just try and take it. We're trying to do the fine line with taking it seriously without sounding like utter boring bellends. Now, it's up to you, Al, whether we've managed to steer that path correctly. But that's what we're trying to do. What do you think, Tony?
Can you hear me now? Because I've just set this up.
No.
I could always hear you. Just being a bellend. Carry on, Tony.
You can hear me.
No, you're going to tick the not suitable for kids box now on YouTube.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, so the podcast, the whole... I always thought that there was a gap in the market for a podcast that kind of takes things seriously, like the old early days of video game development, which essentially started in the arcades. And whilst there's a lot of great podcasts out there, I think they serve a certain purpose. Whereas I think what we wanted to do was to zone in purely on the guest, as Paul said, as opposed to make it a vehicle for our egos, I think.
Yeah, there's I think without naming any names, there are
name them. I mean, name them.
No, I'm not going to do that. No. For my money, a lot of. I mean, I'll tell you the ones I do like. I really like Retro Asylum, which is.
That's Swain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice, intimate, unpretentious. A couple of friends together not in a room, obviously, but at remote locations. But it's just familiar and it's comfortable, and I really like that. But then there's a few other podcasts out there which are kind of like just a bit too smashy and nicey for my liking. And we wanted to, at least from a production values point of view, just kind of like, take the volume down a few notches and, like Tony says, talk to our guests. Not that other people talk to their guests without respect, but it's less of the beery lads thing and more of the somebody compared us to somebody said with a Radio 4 of retro gaming podcasts, which was I took as a compliment.
You want to listen, I don't know what does, right?
Yeah. But
can I be John Humphreys? Right.
You are John Humphreys, yeah.
So
I like that. I was like, I'll take that. That's good. We work hard to make it sound good. Yeah.
I mean, as Tony knows, I've been doing these kind of things for quite a while. And I mean, I've interviewed quite a few. So I mean, who have I had? I've had Dominic Diamond. I think I was kind of the first person. He only agreed to talk to me because I gave him a marathon training program, and because I was Scottish, he said he doesn't do them. And since I've done one, he talks to anybody now, simply. But I've had a lot of people on, and one of the things that I was aware of, and a few people made it known that I was doing this, was fuck, I wish that Scottish guy would stop interrupting and doing it. And I says, wait a minute, I'm just an amateur. I'm just an old guy that likes to talk to people. But one thing that's apparent about your podcast is, you don't ask many questions and you just let the guy talk, and that's what I found very interesting. Yeah. You can tell it's coming from the heart. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Yeah, it is. It's coming from a bona fide interest in. I mean, it's called the Ted Dabney experience because we want to talk to people who. I mean, despite the fact we've actually spoken to a few people who've been interviewed many times before, and we started with Warren Davis, who, I say this with the greatest of respect to Warren, but he knows his own story and he's at all the events, so he's been interviewed many times. But I think we got some really interesting nuggets out of him that I don't think other people have, and I think we want to go on. Sorry, I was going to say I was gutted. I thought Warren Davis. I can't wait to ask him who did he get the part in the Return Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, I think Jesus that before. Al, is that your prep? Is that the prep you've done?
Wait a minute, check his notes.
Right. Just you can tick that one off. You've done that line, right? Our next guest was transgender. Have you got something ready for that?
Actually, Jamie Fenton was she was fantastic. That's probably my favourite so far.
Yeah.
The nice thing about what we somehow seem to have achieved, I don't know whether it's by design or entirely by accident, is even when we're talking to someone like Warren Davis, who has told his story 1,000 times, we've been able to sort of dig a little bit deeper and not ask the obvious stuff. So one of the things you may have noticed is that Paul usually comes in with his opening question, which is not, so Warren, how did you come up with the idea of Q*berts?
Never seen it.
It's we sort of try and start with a bit of a left field to go, oh wow, okay, that's a strange question. So I think that's sort of set the tone for the rest of the podcast, so that they know they don't have to go into autopilot and just spout off their usual story, but actually we're looking for the more different, interesting, deeper dive stuff.
And it is. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. No, I'm just agreeing with Tony. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is. It is. Paul about to laugh now, but it's heavily edited.
Is it?
Yeah, is it? Paul would never know. I spend a lot of time taking out the coughs and the ums and the ahs and the pregnant pauses, and that's not only to make us sound good, but it's also to do justice to our guests, so they can have confidence that we're going to present them in the best possible light. And I'm not quite sure everybody else does that. And it's not necessarily by design. It's just because maybe they don't have. It's a time-consuming process, and maybe I have a little extra time and I'm able to do that. But I think for my money, it's really important.
How much? I mean, I think your average podcast is about an hour, 55 minutes, whatever. How much can it ends up in the sort of cutting room floor?
We interviewed, a lot. I'm not going to tell you who. We interviewed another guy from Atari last week, and we got some superb material, and we spoke for about 2 hours. And I think I'll probably get that down to about an hour 10 minutes, maybe. Getting in there, getting granular, really splicing things out, and also kind of knowing. People kind of go off on random tangents, and it might sound really good at the time, but you kind of, when you're listening back and you're judging the flow of the entire thing, you kind of have to go, that's really cool, but I have to get rid of that. It's not working for the podcast as a whole. And listen, I'm a complete amateur. I come from a creative background, but I am still a complete amateur when it comes to things like this. So I'm not trying to make it sound like I actually know what I'm doing. Just in case you got the wrong impression.
He's definitely learning on the job, is Richie, and he does a fantastic
for sure.
job.
Yeah.
I want to say live on air, he does a fantastic job. Well done, you.
It does.
I wasn't fishing for it. Well,
it's worked.
Whilst we're a team of three, I think. Whilst we're a team of three, I think it certainly needs to be said that Rich is the the reason the podcast sounds so good is because Richie sits there and plows through, the hours of tape that we have and, splices it up and just makes it sound fantastic and concise and compact, so that hopefully every episode tells a story and it's not just a random 2-hour chat.
Can I ask you a question?
I just want to say it's a team effort. It truly is a team effort, and we also have a bespoke score by a good friend of mine who goes under the name Ghost of Wood. So it truly is a team effort, and it wouldn't be what it was without Tony and Paul also. So just let's be straight.
Enough of the mutual loving.
More.
Al, I want to know: are you doing this broadcast from prison? Because you look like you're in solitary, and orange is the new black. Is it like?
Yes.
Is the warder going to come in? Shut it! Right? What? Where the fuck are you? What?
Well, I need to keep it short. It's half an hour and it's lockdown, so yeah. No, my daughter's basically, I got a VR headset and my daughter has commandeered my PC, so I'm sitting downstairs in the kitchen.
There's a very white kitchen. It's scarily white.
I had it redone. Do you like it?
Yeah, let's talk about your kitchen, right? Who did you paint? Have you gone for tiles? No, sorry. Go on, Karen. Right.
I'm actually more interested. You've got this little beamy of light coming right down on you, Paul. Like you've
no, that's heavenly. That's a heavenly light. Yeah. Sorry, should I switch that off? Right? Is it not used to doing that? Right? Yeah.
What's he doing?
I thought that was some toilet bowls you had in the back of him, but it's actually the back of his chair.
Oh no, that looks terrible now, Paul.
That's awful.
We can see you now. What was I going to say? What is the significance of the title? Apologies if I've missed it. Ted Dabney, who is he? I genuinely don't know who he is.
Dear.
Tony,
I know.
Paul. Yeah, go on.
Ted Dabney was, along with Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari. Well, it was called Syzygy then. There is a reason why we called it. Ted sadly passed away 2 years ago now. He is quite recently. I had the privilege of actually interviewing him. Oh God, 10 years ago about the making of Computer Space, because he had a lot to do with that game. The reason we wanted to call it that, which is credit to Tony, actually had. If you're trying to come up with a name for a retro classic gaming one, what you really don't want is to have the words retro classic gaming in, because every fucker has that. So it's like, right, what can you do? Now, if I remember this story correctly, is that Tony, right, said like, good, what about some like the Mary Whitehouse experience? What about the Billy Mitchell experience, which is definitely what you said, which ironically we did. Billy Mitchell was, I think, at the bar when you came up with that. Yes. And he's gone on to make a podcast. So I think, Tony, you are very responsible that he overheard you, right? He was playing on Mame when he heard that. But then it was like, okay, we can't do that. But then it was Rich, I'm pretty sure it was you, mate, who said, let's have the Ted Dabney experience. Because the point is the fact, Al, I imagine you've heard of Nolan Bushnell. Would that be correct?
Right. And I have Ted Dabney. I should have done my homework. I just didn't.
No, I'm not trying to test you. Yeah, you've not failed. Don't worry, right? Is that the point is that we wanted to shine a light on the people less well known, and we thought Ted was a perfect way to sort of say, well, and I'd like to think as we go forward, we're just getting going. So we've talked to people that, we know that I've interviewed or Tony's interviewed before, but I'd really genuinely like to think that we throw a light on people that you won't have heard of. And in fact, are we allowed to say this? Is that in a couple of weeks we're going to do, most of the people we interview will be American. That's just the nature of the industry. But we have actually got a Brit coming on, which will be. I know that'll be quite unusual. So that should be interesting. And then I know when we were driving through America, Tony used to incessantly play me this podcast about Kiss. Now, obviously, Kiss have absolutely no artistic merit, but the podcast was brilliant because it actually talked to people. He knows that. It talked to people that were around Kiss or the people like the road manager, and it was fascinating. And we did say at the start that we try and talk to people like, the women that did the wire wraps or Nolan Bushnell's secretary, which would be great. So maybe as we get going, I think for the first year, I think we're going to talk to people that you may have heard of the games that they've written. But going forward, What do you reckon, boys? We maybe try and find people that haven't been talked to before. There you go.
I think we need to find a way of stopping Paul from bringing up the subject of hot tubs at Atari.
That is my favourite subject.
although
one.
Yeah, the gentleman that we spoke to recently did shed a little light, but for my money it was a bit risque, so I've excised it from the cut. But Tony, yeah, go on. You chip in, man.
Yeah, no, I think Paul's right. I think in the fullness of time, it would be really interesting to talk to more of the, even more unsung heroes.
Yeah.
I'm talking on Sunday night to a guy who was the rep for Electra Home CRT monitors, and it sounds like he completely
you've lost the room. You've lost the room.
So in classic arcade cabs like Missile Command, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, you have an old CRT monitor, which I would like to think most of your viewers would know. And one of the manufacturers was a company called Electra Home. And it sounds like completely by accident, this guy stumbled across Atari, realized, oh, hang on a second, these guys need monitors. We ought to be selling them our monitors, and had to go back to management to persuade them that, no, this is a real genuine opportunity. And they were like, well, video games, what the hell's that? And of course, Atari turned out to be one of their largest customers in America in the end. So he's got a very interesting story to tell about vector monitors and CRT monitors, and going to trade shows, visiting Atari Ireland, visiting Atari in California, and being on the factory floor. So I think to get that kind of insight from a guy who didn't write the games, he wasn't anybody's manager, he's actually nothing to do with Atari, but he had a view of what was going on there from the outside in. I just think pulling out those nuggets for an hour, I think is going to be great. So I'll let you guys know how that goes. By the way, I've got a Skype call with him on Sunday night. So
you've actually just convinced me that he may well be a good candidate, because when you mentioned it originally, I was like, yeah, why do we want to talk about that? But in this context, it's yeah. Sorry, Al. Yeah, we're like
he's already shared a bunch of pictures with me from trade shows that he used to go to, like great 80s pictures of brand new Atari cabinets on the trade show floor, being exhibited to operators and such. So yeah, I think it'll be good in the fullness of time as we start branching out away from the obvious guys and start getting more of these unsung heroes in. Be great.
Yeah, good stuff. I was interested when Jamie Fenton was saying that he might still have the source code for Golf on a 5.5-inch floppy. You're like, what the hell?
Miss Golf, I think he might have Miss Golf, didn't he say?
No, it's she. Sorry, I don't want to be PC for the sake of it, but it's she now. But she said no. She said Golf. She definitely said Golf. Oh, right. Yeah.
Fantastic.
No, maybe and Miss Golf actually. Now you mention
it. And to your point, Al, the thing that's interesting to me talking to all these guys is it can't be stated enough times, and every time you hear these stories about the code for Golf can fit on a floppy disk, or the email I send to Paul tomorrow has got more code in it than the code that wrote Pac-Man, and there were no graphic designers. You were limited by the memory you had. Let's set our games in space because space is black, and that means we don't have to draw sprites on a CRT monitor. So it just all kind of fit together. It's just that level of creativity where you're hamstrung by the technology available at the time. Just every time these guys say this stuff, it just blows my mind. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
What I like hearing is that when you say, we're interviewing them 30, 40 years after they produced these great games. And so you say like, oh, you must have known you got a hit on your hand. We've been playing it for you. And they go, no, we didn't. We don't know. We didn't know what was going to make it, what was going to be popular. One Owen Rubin said, don't ask engineers what a good game is. We're the worst people. we're too close to it, you know. So
go on. Sorry, Paul. Didn't Atari turn down Pac-Man or Space Invaders?
That's what he said.
Well, I know, but the engineers went, "Nah, it's rubbish."
I thought it was interesting. I can't remember who it was that you were talking to, and he basically said that they employed a guy that would come along and say, "Nah, that game's shit." But what they would do, there's a little switch that used to flick it and go, "Ah, shit, it's just crashed," and then they'd put it back on.
The original boss button. That was Owen. Yeah. I actually googled the concept of the boss button, and Wikipedia is wrong. I think Owen was there first with Atari. Quite frankly, I think we should update their Wikipedia page.
Got to say the title font is absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love that. The little indenty music sound very kind of BBC Two early computer program-ish. Was that?
That's exactly what we're going for. For sure.
You hit it, Richie.
Tomorrow's World, 1982. That's the that's crossed with I don't know, like some like George Romero synth score. That was the goal.
You've absolutely nailed it, I should say.
Nailed it.
Named it as well, yeah.
Named it as well, yeah. Named and nailed. Named and nailed.
So how do you go about? Obviously, it's only me, so I can decide who I want on. How do you do it? How do you come up with guests? Is it just an idea from?
Well, this is the only reason we have Paul Drury involved with our podcast.
Yeah, it's my sole contribution, man.
Yeah.
I have a black book full of many things.
Do you remember?
Sure.
You remember I sent you a recording of me playing an early Matthew Smith game, and you sent me a signed photograph of him for Retro Gamer. Do you remember that?
I did. Of course I do. Yeah, I'm very good at giving favours. I'm very good at receiving them as well.
Jesus. I'm glad this is not live. That's all I'm saying.
It is live, isn't it? All right. Yes, I remember doing that. I hope it made you happy.
It did indeed. Yeah.
But yeah, to answer your question, Al, I mean that we have a huge amount of debates. Our follow-up to the podcast, I think, is going to be a book of our Facebook Messenger thread, where we just have endless debates about who should we be talking to. Do we know this guy well enough to approach him? How's it gone with so and so? Have they come back to you? And we have a number of people who we've approached, persuaded that they really should be talking to us because we'll do it properly, and then for whatever reason they've had to drop out. So we've got a sort of live active list, and then we've got a sort of back burner list where we're looking to revisit those people and try to encourage them to come on. But it's definitely not anybody and everybody. There's a huge amount of debate. I'm not entirely sure how productive we are, but there's a number of people which we just feel at this point would be just too obvious to get them on. So we're going to sort of hold off with those guys. So
we're also trying to make it not only guys, which of course isn't easy. It's not easy because you can't recreate the past. You can't say, oh, actually, half of the people that made this game were women, or people from a black or minority ethnic background. That wasn't quite the industry then. However, there were women and people from different backgrounds involved in the industry, and we were going to do our best to give them a voice. But anyway, we'll see. Well,
which is why I was really happy we got Jamie on, and we didn't just want to talk about golf. We wanted to talk about we wanted Jamie to talk about transgender issues and how that. The contrast between gamer culture as we know it and being trans in the game world, it's quite the contrast, for want of a better word. Well, it's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to read this one out. It's a big sentence. Given these early games existed almost like 40 years ago, how significant do you think that these sort of interviews are? And do you see these as being part of a kind of historical archiving of the video game timeline and history, which people will look back at in years to come?
Wow.
That was a big question there, Al. I think the point you've just made there is that sometimes when Richie talks about who to get on, he will then, a bit like the way newspaper journalists, they always then put the age in brackets, right? So he'll say, do you know Don Bluth, brackets 82, right? Like as if the Tom. I'm like, yeah, I'll okay. But
The clock
Did you say
ticking.
Tom Bluth? Don Bluth. Don Bluth.
Oh, I was contacting his brother. I'm really sorry. That's obviously why he's not answered. Sorry about that.
That's why he's not on.
Oh, that's it. Shit. Well, the wrong person. Oh, bloody hell. Right, sorry. You didn't want it.
That was fast.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, so partly is that some of these people aren't getting any younger. As we said, Ted Dabney passed away. I mean, it would have been great to get him on the show. Actually, that would have been quite apt.
not posthumously.
Posthumously would be tricky.
Yeah.
But there's some people, they're in their 70s and 80s. I mean, I talked to Steve Russell, who did computer Space War, in the 60s, and he's in his 80s. There's, and me and Tony, and I don't know if you have as well, Richie, but we were lucky enough to meet Ralph Bayer. These are legends who are sadly not with us anymore. Yeah. Yes, sorry. So
and Tim and Tim Skelly as well.
Tim Skelly as well. Yeah. Good point. So some of these people are not going to be around forever, and it'd be lovely to get their voice. I think that's significant. It's their voice, because a lot of the people I interview people all the time for Retro Gamer, but it's kind of nice to actually literally hear their voice. If you're into poetry, of course you're into poetry. Is it like, obviously you've got the poems of T.S. Eliot or whatever, but to actually hear him, posh lad, hear him actually recite his own poetry back there, and I'd like to think in a tiny way that we are doing that as well. There you go.
I think also, many of the games that were created back then, most people have forgotten about, apart from the obvious, classics in inverted commas like Pac-Man and Space Invaders. But even stuff like Star Wars, Atari Star Wars, that is still. I mean, most people don't get to experience it, but in its original form. But it remains a timeless classic to this day. And Arcade 1-Up, for example, are doing. They're releasing their, kind of Star Wars. It's not an LCD screened MDF cab, but how and you get all the arcade game collectors going, I'm not going to buy an Arcade 1-Up. It's not genuine. I'm like, for fuck's sake, how often you don't get to experience playing Atari Star Wars on a yoke controller. Like, give them their due. Even if you're gonna in a nerdy arcade collecting kind of way, gonna slag off the Pac-Man release or whatever else they put out. The fact that this stuff is now available for people to dive back into is, I think, it should be celebrated.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely.
But
So,
the games are timeless. Is the point? The good game design is timeless, regardless of. I'm playing Last of Us Part 2 at the moment, and that's obviously a whole different ball game from what we're covering. But that's a fantastic game. That's an immersive game. But I find a game such as Mad Planets or Star Wars, in its own way, just as immersive.
Oh yeah. Have you got to that horrible scene in The Last of Us Part 2 with the golf club? Have you gone past that, Richie? I'm like 4 hours in.
Right,
So
boys,
we'll come back
Jesus.
in a bit. Yeah. Sorry, get back to the old stuff. Sorry, Al, carry on. Right.
No, that's okay. So you've obviously you kind of come up with a list of people. Have you got a holy grail of people? Is there anybody you goes, would absolutely love to get that person, but how do you get in contact with them? And how do you get in contact with them? Presumably you're saying through, obviously Tony, he's got his arcade blogger. You guys are all right into the scene. Have you got any holy grail guests?
We actually, the one I'm editing right now for me was a holy grail. The guy from Atari we've spoken to and I'm working on now is my holy grail. But Paul and Tony will give you theirs, I'm sure.
Well, we peaked a bit early for you there, Richie. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to sit back. Yeah, go on.
Some of the, one day we'll perhaps have Nolan Bushnell if he'd come on. Holy Grail, Tony will say Dave Toyer, and I tend to agree.
Actually, Dave Toyer would be, and Donna Bailey. We'd love Donna Bailey. We've been speaking to Donna Bailey, and we're working on Donna. And we'll see what happens. But Dave, who Tony knows anyway, would be great. But it's also a case of no pressure. But it's also a case of knowing perhaps who's going to be a good interviewee, and if one is maybe slightly reticent on the mic or on camera, shall we say, they may not make for the the best interviewee. But I don't know. We'll see.
I think that's true. I think we've been very lucky so far that all of the people we've spoken to actually are very what's the word I'm looking for? Paul. Eloquent. Yeah. Unlike me.
Yeah.
They've all been able to recount their stories in a sort of whimsical, amusing way. And I think there are some people who we'd love to get on who, talking personally, sort of based on my interactions with them, like, yeah, it'd be great to get them on because there's not many interviews with them. And then you realize there's a reason why there's not many interviews with them, because they're the sort of king of the one-line answers. You know, it's like, can you tell me any more? No, that's the answer. So that's going to give Richie a editing nightmare. How do you edit 10 minutes of content into an hour's podcast?
I actually, I mean, we said we wanted to. I mean, we've discussed why it's called the Ted Dabney Experience, but it would be nice to get people like Nolan on eventually. Maybe Eugene Jarvis, although everybody speaks to Eugene. But even as we go on, even as we are kind of ploughing the unsung heroes, I still want to talk to Billy Mitchell on and have it. We've spoken to him directly, and he's got his own podcast. But there are certain things I'd like to talk to Billy about, and I would enjoy doing that. Mm-hmm. Even though he's not a creator from back in the day, but he is an original player. You know?
Yeah.
Oh, he's a player. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
yeah, he's a player. That's sure. Yeah,
it's true.
I'd like that.
I mean, obviously, these guys were like code monkeys. They were probably looked at as geeks, and so not everybody's going to be comfortable with being spoken to or being interviewed. Yeah. I mean, obviously yourself, Paul, you've done a lot of interviews. I've interviewed the people. I was doing the Play Blackpool last year, interviewing a few people, and some people, they can be quite hard work. You ask them a question and they give you a one-word answer, and you're like, shit, and you're like, hey, wait a wee minute.
I think Al, I think what's interesting is that you see, you were sometimes asking people about stuff they did over 40 years ago, and usually games, perhaps took 6 months, sometimes 3 months, so it's just a very small period of their life. And so I know I find myself saying, so, when you decided to put that on screen 2 in the top left-hand corner, what was going through your mind? And they're like, fuck. What? I can barely remember what year it was. And of course it's but then also there's a charm. I think they feel charm that some nerds like us three are us four are so bothered about something they created that we would ask them something so specific about 1 week in their life when they were 22, right? And it was a job. Remember, they're not. You see, it's an interesting form, isn't it? Because they're not artists in that they were just producing this work. It was a job and it was a commercial product. Yeah, but it's also got those elements. Well, it's got those elements of art that they care. They had to make decisions about how it looked aesthetically and how it played. So some of them, I tell you what, is that I would love to interview some of the Japanese developers. Yeah, right. And of course, the biggest problem is that the language barrier, right? But actually, I've managed, I've written for Retro Game for 16 years, and on that time, I managed to interview 2 people from Japan. And I won't say who they are, but the games they make are great, right? But when you ask them about them, it was very clearly their job. And so you haven't got what you want them to say, like Americans do, is like, oh man, it was awesome. And they don't say that. It's like, yes, I went to work and produced the work and I was very pleased how it looked. And you're like, right, how are you feeling? How are you feeling then? It was good. The work was good. And you're like, fucking hell, get excited. Right, which to be fair, in California in the 70s and 80s, not all, but a lot of those programs, they were excited and they were partying and they were talking to each other. And I think it wasn't just a job, which hopefully we can reflect some of those things. When we were talking to our next interviewee, it was a long time. He paused before he answered every question, right? But then it was like something clicked. And Richie said this lovely line. He said it was like he was back there again. Oh, yes. God, yeah, I remember when we made that decision or did that control or this guy said this sort of, and that's one of the pleasures of doing it.
And that's, I think it's the other thing is I'm always mindful not going too fanboy and assuming, to Paul's point, that these guys, you know, were anything other at the time than salaried coders, and that's essentially what they were. So it's kind of like someone asking you about the paper round you did when you were 17. Was it the Times or the Telegraph you used to deliver to number 18? It's kind of on the same lines. But I will say,
you're speaking to craftsmen. You're speaking to craftsmen, maybe not artists, but you're speaking to commercial artists, I would say.
But I would say of the 4 or 5 we've done so far, I distinctly got the impression at the end of every one that every person we spoke to really enjoyed the process.
Yeah.
So it's almost kind of like, it's kind of like therapeutic for them to actually get this stuff out there and to be able to share their stories in a intelligent environment, as opposed to just waffling on for a couple of hours. And so I think so far it's kind of, you know, mission accomplished, and we're definitely going in the right direction.
And people have said some very nice things, which I mean, I was very tempted at the start to scour Apple, you know, the Apple charts and the podcast charts, and we charted really highly. You get sucked in. We charted really highly in for what we're doing, and I was like, wow, that's impressive. But there's a danger there in thinking, you know, you do, like Paul says, you get sucked in, and I pledged to myself, I'm like, I'm beyond that. I'm 44. I've been there, done that.
You don't look it, Richie.
Bless you. But I don't feel the need, despite feeling the need temporarily, I don't feel the need to kind of monitor that stuff. I feel if we just we stay the course, we do what we plan to do, we create this body of work, for want of actually that's a good phrase. We create this body of work that we can look back on in, even if it lasts a year or 2 years, we'll see. But I want to look back and be proud of what we've done, and I think I'm happy so far. So, you know,
if Rich is happy, we're happy.
This is it. This is what it's all about. You know?
Al, what motivates you to do your show?
Primarily just because, I mean, I've got a big collection of games, Paul. But I'm turning into my dad. God bless him.
That's good motivation, mate. Right?
We all?
What you mean? You're directing traffic in public, right? What are you? Or moaning that the police are getting younger? What do you mean you're turning to your dad? Are you drinking Buckfast on the street? What's going on?
On the weekend. No, I just love talking about. I love talking about the old days. And I mean, I kind of look upon myself as not a gamer, not a collector. I certainly don't collect games. I buy games to play them. I'm more like a historian, you know. And I think what you guys do, what I do, what all the people do, it's we're kind of archiving this for years to come. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
I do because I love talking about it, and I love listening to people talking about it.
We're on the same side, right?
You know, fantastic. So, see, when you've obviously got a guest, you've tied up a date. How do you prepare for an interview? Do you have a shared Google Doc or something? And how do you
know what? We've fucking winged it so far until the point where I said to Paul, I'm like, dude, can you actually do the show notes? Because I'm editing. I'm like, Paul's definitely, but like Paul has his little black book, and he also has his skills when it comes to things like organization quite clearly. And Paul, so what we're going to do from this podcast that I'm editing now onwards is Paul's basically in charge of like an overall direction, and it worked really well. It worked really, really well.
Mm-hmm. That's very kind. I think it's that we all three of us have got different interests as well. Not in terms of leatherware, right? I just mean different interests in terms of what angle to come at. So I'm not a collector of games, right? I haven't got cabs. All these with their bloody arcade bling in the background, right? I'm not. I love video games, but I'm not that interested in that bit. Is that I'm just interested in the person and that process. So they ask brilliant stuff around the technical detail around a machine, and I know that's really important. And I just like, I'm not that interested in that. But hopefully people are interested in other things like, you know, what was the creative process, or, you know, when did they transition from a man to a woman? And like, I'm interested in shit like that, as are they. So I think we've also noticed that if you know, Al, you've been doing this for ages, so you must look back. You can tell us, you must look back on your videos and stroke your chin and think it is funny listening back, because we've clearly, all of us have got these little things that we always come back to, right? So Tony, sorry, I'll let people explain their little quirks, and mine's clearly hot tubs. I'm just interested in hot tubs, and I will make sure they're mentioned every single show. But Richie and Tony, you can share your little interest if you'd like.
Tony,
I've got no idea what mine is. Do I have a tick or something? I know I say a lot on camera.
You do say a lot, yeah.
Is that what you mean?
You'll sort of go, I'm really interested in. That's my.
Oh, do I?
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to listen to myself.
Really interested in. Yeah.
Well,
okay. All right.
I mean,
I'll take that.
I like to collect plastic crap in general. It just happens that arcade machines are wooden crap, I guess, if you're going to file those under the same banner. I don't know. Is that a tick? That's a failing. It's a character failing for sure.
I think we should cease this conversation. I'm clearly picking apart my good.
I'm like, what?
Picking apart. I always say, like, I'm intrigued, right? Which I must stop saying. I'm intrigued, but I'm going to stop saying that from now. But yeah. Anyway, Al, back to it.
Who's got the best collection of arcade cabs then? Is it yourself, Rich?
I've got a few things, and I've got a few things in storage. I've actually sold a few things lately, because it's kind of weird. You know, you see these things on, is it Clov or KLOV? How do you pronounce it, Tony? What's the correct? Okay, it's an American arcade collecting forum called Clov. And you obviously have the for sale section. So there are a few different ways of buying and collecting these things. You know, you've got people in the UK who run containers. You've got a few people who did run containers and who no longer do. You've got you can approach collectors directly in the States and organize shipping. But the thing for me is that, you know, the lead time. So you see a cabinet, an arcade cabinet that you've been looking for a very long time, and presumably it's in an original condition, or it's been restored, or whatever. It's got the original boards, the arcade boards, or it's got like an FPGA modern PCB equivalent. And you talk to these people, you organize the shipping, and, you know, it's a good couple of months from seeing the thing, buying it, to getting it over here. And in that time, you may well have spotted a few other things, and you've kind of got, right, I'm not going to see that in another 2 years, so I'm going to go for that as well. Before you know it, you have a few things that take up a lot of space. So I have a small storage unit where I keep my collection, and I rotate things in and out of my office at home. But inevitably, when you do that, you don't really get to play everything, because these things ultimately, you know, you can go on Mame on a PC or whatever, and you can kind of play them on your laptop. So for me,
not the same.
No, it's not the same. And you know, the games that I really treasure are games that, you know, you can't really play on Mame, such as like some of the where you can play with twin stick shooters. But Star Wars, for example, you can't really play on Mame unless you've got some kind of suitable yoke controller setup.
That game you've got in the background, Mad Planets, that you've got in the background, that only really works on that cab.
Well, you can set that up with like a Japanese candy cab with a spinner and a joystick. You can do it, but it's just not quite the same. And it goes for, you know, stuff like Pole Position, like the original driving games, Outrun. The game cabinets that really do, because, you know, the games, especially back in the day, the games were more than just about the software. They were about the arcade cabinet design, you know, and there's no better example of that than a Star Wars cockpit cabinet. There's no better example of that than a Sega G-Lock 360, or what's it called, the R360, where you get in the damn thing and you spin around, and, you know, try and find one of those. You can't, you know, a few collectors have them. So that's why people collect arcade cabinets. That's why I collect arcade cabinets, because I like the graphic design, I like the history, and I specifically like the games that you just can't play anywhere else unless you've got the original thing right in front of you.
Tony, aren't you in touch with Mike? Is it Mike Jank that did a lot of the cabinet design? You see, that's the kind of person we want to get on the show. Tell us about Mike, Tony.
Yeah, Mike, I got in touch with Mike as I was doing research for my book, and Mike Jang was an industrial designer at Atari, and so he had a hand in the ergonomic design of many of the well-known Atari cabinets that we play now. So things like Missile Command started out looking completely different to the final production cabinet that rolled out of the factory. And so Mike was involved with, taking a brief from the designer of the game about, what's the game about? What sort of cabinet do we want? What does that mean for the player? How high does it have to be? What's the slope of the control panel? What kind of controls do we want on there? What's the angle of the screen? Can kids play this okay, or are we going to need to do something? So something simple like Battlezone with the periscope viewer. It became very clear that young kids couldn't reach to view because it was just a tiny screen to view in. So they built a step. The answer to that was to build a step, which was screwed into the back of the cabinet. So when it arrived in the arcade, the operator had the choice of either leaving the step there, which of course most of them did, or unscrewing the step and screwing it to the front of the cabinet so that kids could play the game. So it's just sort of, the small things like that when you look at something like a Battlezone cab, you don't even stop to think, well, why did they do that? And what's this step here for? And who designed that step? And what was the process we went through? So Mike's just a wealth of information at the end of email at the moment. When I've got a question for him, when I'm writing something for the blog, I quickly send Mike an email and go, can you tell me a little bit more about this? And he'll just come back with tons of info. But yes, you're right, guys. We need to get him on.
Actually, Tony, it's Battlezone's a good example, and you might want to talk about very briefly the Bradley Trainer and Atari's dalliance with the military industrial complex. As in, there you go. That's your cue.
Oh, sorry. Right.
We're all interviewing Tony, right?
Yeah. This is sorry,
3 against 1, mate. 3 against 1.
So Battlezone, and
I thought it'd be interesting. Go on.
You can read about this on arcadeblogger.com.
Arcadeblogger.com.
Fuck that. The Ted Dabney experience. What's going about?
So Battlezone morphed into something completely different. So when Battlezone was released, wireframe graphics, tanks, twin stick shooter, the army got wind of Battlezone, and there was a discussion with Atari, between Atari and the military, or representatives of the military, to could we adapt this game in some way to turn it into a training vehicle. So rather than actually sending people out in tanks and firing $500,000 missiles all over the place, could we get them to sort of train for get the basics from a video game? Which
and the answer was no. It's not the same.
Yeah, the answer was no. So anyway, there's a whole story about the original designer of Battlezone being asked to develop this game, and being something of a pacifist and maybe a bit of a hippie. He was very much against any involvement with the military on Atari's part. But interestingly, they redesigned the twin stick controller to something much more akin to what became the Star Wars yoke controller with the
However,
so
in the age of drone warfare, look how far we've come.
Ironic, isn't it? Yeah.
Right.
But there's a real genesis, not only to the individual games, where you just look at a Battlezone and go, yeah, it's all right. But if you then sort of rewind the clock a bit and you hear the stories about how they got to that cabinet and that design and the height and the use of a mirror to reflect so on Battlezone, the monitor is not in front of you. It's actually on its back, pointing upwards, and what you see is a reflection in a mirror. Just all those design choices are just great to dig into. And there's a real lineage to something like Star Wars. You can trace its lineage back through Battlezone, and even before that to even earlier Vector games. It's just a huge maze, which is all kind of connected.
And also, just briefly to speak to that Vector XY hardware, you know, people aren't making that anymore. That kind of existed within a certain kind of time frame, and that kind of technology was, you know, the arcade operators found it hard to maintain, just as they did Laserdisc games. But there's nothing quite like a Vector monitor. You've got to play these games with the real hardware, with you know, with a real XY monitor. It's just not the same otherwise, and no matter how well emulated they are. Anyway,
yeah, not the same experience. Just what I was going to say, guys. So, guess wise, do you have a kind of? In fact, excuse me, guys, I need to let my dog out for a quick piss. Want a trick?
Yeah, go for it.
Come on,
Shall we talk amongst ourselves?
No,
He really is letting his dog out for a piss.
It was about to piss on the
I'm letting my dogs piss on the floor.
Bloody
Hey!
He's going to piss the floor, and he's jumping up at me, and I'm trying to kind of keep us straight.
We've got so many fucking acid stains on our wooden floor from our dogs pissing.
I thought it was your drug habit, right?
No, we got a new puppy. We got a puppy. We got a lockdown puppy.
You've done a lot in lockdown, Richie. Puppies.
No, we've already got a dog, but we got another one, and my God, bless her, she's peeing all over the floor. It's going to need resanding at some point.
Well, that's. I hope this stays in. Right.
Yeah. So, can you guess wise? Do you guys have a designated sort of timeline of activity you want to focus on, or are you looking to maybe include like current guests? Would you ever? Is it always going to be the kind of golden age of video games? Do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Find your niche. We found our niche. Some of the people we talked to went on and had careers, you know, into the 90s and noughties, or went into home games and stuff like that. And I'm really pleased that we are really anal about it by saying that no, we'll just focus on the classic era, which is sort of, you know, 70s up to the end of the 80s. We can just go into the 90s a little bit. We'll give you a bit of that. But yeah, and I think that hopefully will make it interesting because it is focused. No disrespect to podcasts that do everything, right? That's absolutely fine. But I just feel we've got a niche. Is that fair enough, boys?
Absolutely. I think focus is always a better word than anal, but it's fine.
Well, it depends in what context.
We did talk to Gary Vincent, who's the curator of ACAM.
Yes.
So that sort of crossed over. But the reason we spoke to Gary, whilst he's not a developer, he was there in the early 80s. And so he had some great insight into how the industry works from so how does a machine go from Atari's factory floor onto an arcade in the middle of New Hampshire? What's that process? What are the commercials? Does the arcade buy the machine outright? Do they loan it? Do they rent it? How does all that work? So he was great in that respect. And I think as well, what Gary brought to the show was some interesting insight into what it means to operate an arcade. And what goes into Operation Arcade now, the same rules are arguably still applied in the early 80s. So he was able to give us some really interesting left field insight into the sharp end of the classic arcade industry, I think.
I think somebody was, Rich touched on it earlier on about anybody can interview Eugene Jarvis, whatever, but you know, the guy you were just mentioning, he was like almost like the caretaker of what do you call it? Twin Galaxies. What's the big arcade again?
Fun Spot.
You asked him about what do you call it? Billy Mitchell. He went, "What do you think of him?" Could they care less?
we tried to push him more on that, right? But he was not having any of it.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. What do you really? No.
But Gary's first of all, he's a lovely, personable, gentle, warm guy. He has an educational mission as well. ACAM has an educational mission. It's not just an arcade, and I think that's important to mention. And I think Gary's warm, laconic tone. You know, he's very considered, he's very gentle, and that's obviously born of a lot of time talking, you know, like talking to younger people who have grown up with touchscreens and are genuinely interested to know what mum and dad and even grandpa these days, you know, what games did they play back in the day? And he's probably the most patient man I've met in arcade collecting. And he really, ACAM itself is, I don't know if you've been out, but it's a magical place. And, you know, you've got retro arcades popping up left, right, and center. It's still very much a thing. You've got people doing it really, really well, like Arcade Club in Bury, and now Leeds. But in the States, you know, you got people doing similar things in the States. But ACAM, despite no longer being, even though Bob Lawton likes Paul's quote of being the largest arcade in the world, it isn't necessarily true. I think that honor goes to Galloping Ghosts, which is near Chicago. Is it in Chicago, Galloping Ghosts?
Yeah, it's in Chicago.
Yeah. Right, fine. But ACAM it's still a uniquely wonderful place, and the fact that it's situated within FunSpot, which has its own history, and Gary has his own history with the Lawton family. It's fascinating. It's a magical place, and Tony can speak more about that.
What is the relationship to ACAM to FunSpot? Is that a small section of FunSpot?
It's a large section. Tony, go on.
You say, Tony.
So FunSpot is the main arcade, and they had all of the video games up on the top floor. And I think it was probably twofold. I think Gary one day decided that turning that into a museum would be a far more satisfying experience and commercially viable experience, frankly, than just having these old arcade machines on 24/7, 365 days a year on the top floor of an arcade that wasn't really making money in and of itself. So I think they ring-fenced all of that and made it a non-profit.
Yeah, and that wasn't until 1998. So all those, I think what Richie was touching on then is that what's kind of sweet is that loads of those games are the same ones that arrived straight from night. So, like when you're playing the fire truck, great game, right? Is that's the fire truck that arrived in 1978, and it's still there, or the Indy 800. Yeah. And and apparently, Tony, you are right, Tony. But apparently they were still scattered around the arcade, and then he said, "Can we put them on the top floor?" And that was in 1998. And then I think they got the idea of making it a charity or non-profit. I don't know what the bloody difference is in America, but there is one. And it is staggering. Al, you need to go, because when you walk up those stairs to the top floor, it is like ascending to arcade heaven. You expect, you know, kind of St. Peter there handing out quarters as you come in through the pearly gates, right? You know, and the first machine you see is Indy 800, which is the original Indy 800. So it's brilliant. It is magical. And in fact, Gary said it's one of the best things about it is seeing people's old man's faces like ours, just, you know, beaming at the, you know, stepping back in time.
Yeah. Was it yourself, Rich, that was talking about as you walked up the stairs, this massive grin appeared on your face?
He came in his pants, is what he actually said, but then he edited that out.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah,
he edited that out, and he said I had a big grin on my face. So.
You know what it is? What it was for me? I mean, Tony's been many times before. Paul's been before. So I went with Tony a few years ago, and he gave me the guided tour, and he took me in the side entrance, so to speak, and he. And we walked up the stairs, and we probably said this thing about 3 times, but it's also the smell. So the smell of dust burning off, you know, old PCBs and monitors. It's got a very distinctive smell, and it's amazing. It's like when you smell a perfume, it reminds you of somebody you used to know. It's the same thing, and it's, you know, it's that speaks to my point about, you know, playing these games. If you have the opportunity, if you're fortunate enough to be able to maybe afford 1 or 2 cabinets, because it is a disposable income situation. If you're fortunate enough to be able to afford a few cabinets, or these days you can go to Arcade Club if you're in the UK, or ACAM in the US. But if you know the opportunity to play these games as they were originally intended, it's not just the software. It's for CRT screen. It's the original controls. It's the old battered cab, if that's the way it is. It's for smell. It's for sounds. It's for whole sensory experience, and that's at least that's what makes me excited. You know, it does, and that's what ACAM provide. It's what many retro arcades provide, but ACAM specifically, that really kind of triggered something for me. So yeah, I've come down. I'm fine.
I was down in arcade club about 3 months ago, and one of the things that kind of hit me that I really miss about the old days is the fact that you can, as your mates putting a high score in Centipede, looking over the cab watching them. Conversely, I'm pretty shit at most games.
Track and field.
And just having somebody, knowing that you're getting a high score in Berserk, you know that there's a guy behind you going, Christ, look at him, he's doing okay. There's something about, it's just nice, you can actually share the experience with somebody at close proximity.
Yeah, and Andy is doing an amazing job with Arcade Club. I mean, we actually have to at some point get him. We did do an interview with Andy for the podcast, but it didn't quite. We didn't quite get into a good enough rhythm. But I think in time we'll get him back on. But he's doing such good work with Arcade Club, and like you say, that playing track and field with it, you can't play. First of all, when do you get to play track and field? But like playing track and field in an arcade, and there's like 4 of you, gathered around. Yeah. It's magical. It really is. It's good fun.
Yeah, fantastic. Second last question, guys. Obviously, other than personal collections like Arcade Club, bar arcades, do you think we will ever see the return of the arcade? I mean, I think a big part of the arcade back in the early 80s was the fact that, you could play Galaxian, whereas we were sitting playing a Commodore 64, playing some real shit version. You went to the arcades for the real experience. Now you've got a PlayStation 4, which just looks like real life. Do you think we'll ever get arcades again? And I don't mean like classic games. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where you go in an arcade and you play some big video game? Or has that had its time, do you think?
The obvious answer is no, isn't it? Because that's what you're expecting, because we haven't really had that since the 90s. So I'd like to say something positive, is that I wonder whether the virtual reality thing might actually lead to, because I'm not quite sure whether it's really, I thought the PS5 might have included VR, which would have been a bold and expensive statement, right? Yeah. But they probably sensibly didn't do that. So they've tried so hard to get VR going at home, and it's not quite taken over, has it, in the way they were saying. And I wonder whether maybe that, I remember in the perhaps you do, remember in the 90s when they used to have those VR sort of arcades when you could go in. And they were great because you couldn't afford that at home. Yeah. And I just wondered in terms of space and that. I know they've got some, but they're not really arcades, are they? They sort of
you've got this. What's that Star Wars experience? It toured the UK, didn't it? You can do like a kind of immersive Star Wars experience.
Yeah. And in the time when especially after this COVID thing, everyone's like, well, we don't really need to go to the high street, and there's going to be lots of empty shops. I wonder whether over the rest of our lifetime, we've got a few decades yet, lads, is that the high street will be reinvented as not somewhere where you shop, it's somewhere you go to do stuff that you can't at home. So, Al, I'd like to it would be easy to be pessimistic, but I'd like to say I think there might be some game-related thing that relates to, I was going to say, performing in public, but that sounds like I'm into dogging, right? It's not. It's just performing in public, which I think that might be something. What do you think, boys?
It's funny you mentioned VR. So every year I go to the ATEI trade show in London, which anybody can register for. Incidentally, it's well worth going.
What is that, Tony? What does that stand for?
So it's the amusement trade coin-op trade show, and it's where the likes of Sega and Namco and Raw Thrills,
UG,
you carry on, and Stern Pinball. It's where they show all of their new, the latest stuff that's coming out for operators to buy and to obviously site in their arcades or their bowling alleys or whatever it might be. And what was particularly interesting this year and indeed last year was the prevalence of VR experiences. Oh, wow. So you have now got huge, 30-foot by 30-foot square areas where 4 players walk in. There's VRs hanging from the ceiling. You put your headphones on in your VR headset, and you're suddenly, running down LV-42, shooting aliens in the face.
LV-426 is the correct planet designation from Aliens, Tony.
Trying to be clever.
He doesn't get out much, Tony. Bear with him.
Express elevator to hell.
And
VR, I treated myself to, what was it called, the Oculus Quest. I got that a couple of months ago, and one of the fundamental reasons for buying it was there's a VR 80s arcade. Bloody hell! I'm not going to swear, I've absolutely nailed it. It's just
wow. Okay.
Carpet, like you've got in Tony's games room. They've absolutely nailed it, and the fact that you can. I mean, I get kind of suffer from nausea when I play these things, but I just love walking out this 80s arcade. You can go up to machines, you can look at the joysticks and whatever. It's just.
But do they smell? Can you smell the burning dust on the? If you can't smell it, it's no point, mate.
Unless my dog's done a pish on the carpet, then it does feel pretty authentic. But
hey, he says pish with an H.
Smell it.
Brilliant.
Smell-o-vision.
Listen, guys, what is your impression of Mame? I mean, I know it was. Do you think Mame is a very important bit of software? I personally think it's the best bit of software ever
in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
It is.
My without being too much of a dick about it, I think Mame is massively important because of its, the reason why it was originally done, which was to preserve the history of arcade gaming. I mean, we've all done it. We've all had a drink and we've all played Mame either on a cabinet or on a PC, and we've downloaded all the ROMs, and I think that's fine. But I think there's a danger that the community, the hobby, can forget why Mame was created in the first place, and it wasn't for us all to pirate games and play them all for free. It was actually as a preservation tool, and I think so long as that continues and there are guys who are still passionate about dumping new games that they come across, then yeah, I think it's fantastic as a historical preservation tool.
And it really is important to say that only a small minority of us even have an interest in collecting original arcade machines or even original PCB boards. So for most people, Mame really is, in 2020, is going to be the only way they're going to be able to play excuse me, these classic games. So I think it's important, while it was originally designed as a way to preserve arcade history, it's important to view it through 2020 hindsight, through the as we see things now. And most people can't play this stuff unless you're going to play it on Mame. I mean, how else are you going to play these games, right? I
agree with all that, and also like the fact that there's a platform for games that never got released in the 70s and 80s. Is that when you were players, it would never cross your mind that someone made a game and then it wasn't released. That just would have got. But of course, when you talk to these people, it's a huge amount of games that never got, and some of them were finished, ready to play. And the fact we've got a platform now, that's one of the things that we tend to ask guests, that tells about the things that didn't come out, because we all want to know, what could have been.
And there's a book about read-only memory, putting a book out, or they put a book out.
Games that weren't.
There you go. It looks fantastic.
Frank Gaskin is great, and it's got like mini golf from Atari. It's got some 70s
and games stuff. Games like Mike Halley from Atari. He designed a game called Aka-R.
Oh yeah,
Marble Man, Aka-R, and Aka-R got like 3 cabinets. How many cabinets were made, Tony? For like prototypes.
3 or something, yeah.
Yeah, the game just wasn't released. 3 were made. It's
bloody good. It's good, isn't it?
It's an amazing game, and where you need a trackball to play it. But where else are you going to play it other than? And it was somebody. The legend goes, some arcade collector. He had a tech guy who came around and illegally, discreetly, secretly, kind of copied the ROMs from the game, and then it was obviously in Mame. But I mean, if it wasn't for Mame, where would we go for this gaming history? Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, purely from a sort of a selfish point of view, to what Tony was saying, I've downloaded all the ROMs. I don't own any of them. Technically, I'm committing piracy. But being a lad that grew up in central Scotland, my mum and dad hated Blackpool, so the only time I got to play that game,
I didn't know where that was going then.
the only time I got to play an arcade game was when I went to my local judo lesson, and I would get 10 pence to play Space Invaders. And for me, it's been like the Christmas gift. I mean, I remember I remember the very first time my mate brought up a floppy disk and I could load. I had Arcade Galaxian on my PC. It didn't have any sound at that point. I was absolutely blown away. And it was at Dave's Video Game Classics. That was the website that was back in the good old days where he just put a link to every ROM. He just did highlight free download manager, boom, and it was like the next one's going to support Kung Fu, and it was literally like Christmas. It was quite literally like somebody giving you 50 arcade games. It was
I like that his name was Dave, because that was always the name of the bloke that gave out the change in the arcade. He was all sitting there reading the Sunday Sport, right? It was giving you your 10p's, having a Benson and Edges. He was always called Dave. So that's a bit of circularity. I like that.
I think also, I think it's from a kind of like the legality of ROMs point of view. I think it was far dodgier doing what. Listen, I can only speak for myself, but I think all my mates did. Most of my Commodore 64 games, due to the fact that I had no fucking money when I was growing up, apart from what was earned on my paper round, most of it was taped, it was copied. And if I was making those games back then, I would have not been happy that, the amount of money that was lost.
Home taping is killing games.
It is. But how else would we have played these games? Speaking as a kid, growing up in Sutton-in-Ashfield, in Nottinghamshire, with no money, with nothing, I would have played nothing. And it's like you find a way, and hopefully with Mame, at least for me, speaking as a collector, I play a game in Mame, and you play it for 5 minutes, and okay, I don't like that. It's a bit of history. I don't like it. But if I find something I really, really like Black Widow, for example, Atari's Black Widow, I played that to death in Mame, and I eventually found my own cabinet. So from a collector point of view, it's good as a reference point. For your average game player, it's great. It's great to experience a history, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Listen, on that bombshell, guys, the wardens just said it's lights out in 10 minutes, so I better get going and wash my face. So listen, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure everybody's enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
To both your YouTube and to your podcast channel. Next time you're going to the States, give me a shout and I'll come along if you would have me.
Yeah.
Good luck with your show as well, Al. All right. Once they let you out of prison, good luck with making the show. All right. And we'll see you at a retro do too.
Months, so that's when I get out. So
okay.
Listen, guys, thanks very much for taking time to talk to me. Until
thanks,
listen,
Al.
guys, thank you very much for watching. Please put your comments down below. Until the next time, guys, take it easy. Cheers, boys.